I used to think I knew who I was, that I understood my limits. But when betrayal came crashing down, I realized one thing. Those limits only exist when you haven't been pushed to the edge. In that moment, I was no longer the loyal friend or the dutiful wife. I became something else, a monster born from the pain and the betrayal. And when everything fell apart, I had only one goal left: revenge. Hi everyone, welcome to Revenge Echo. Let's get started. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never planned it, not once. It's easy to say that now, after everything has been ruined. But back then, I had no idea how quickly everything could spiral out of control. Life, mine at least, was a series of neat little compartments. There was my work, my friends, my family, and then there was him. No, I wasn't supposed to even think about him that way. Not after everything. Not after years of being friends with Sarah, his sister. But that night, well, that night changed everything. The first time I met Jake, I was 21, freshly out of college, and a little too drunk on ambition to see how reckless I was becoming. I had a part-time job at a bookstore, trying to pay the rent while waiting for my big break, the kind of optimistic nonsense you can only get away with when you're young and don't yet know how the world works. Sarah and I had met in college, both of us studying literature, both of us obsessed with the same obscure authors who no one else had ever heard of. She was my rock, my best friend. The one who always knew how to make me laugh, how to calm me down when I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. Her brother, Jake, was different. He was older, 28 when we first met. And he had that kind of presence that you couldn't ignore. Tall, with dark hair that fell just past his collar, and eyes that seemed to be studying you, even when he wasn't looking directly at you. Every time he smiled, I felt like it could break something inside me. The way he looked at you, intense, but never giving anything away, was almost predatory. Like he knew things about you that you didn't even know about yourself. And I hated him for it. I hated how much I noticed him, how he made my skin flush every time he came around, even though I didn't want him to. He was Sarah's brother. He wasn't supposed to be anything to me. I had no right to feel anything for him, not after all the years of friendship with Sarah. But of course, feelings don't care about things like right or wrong. They don't care about boundaries. They just happen, like an itch you can't reach, like a whisper in the back of your mind that keeps growing louder until it drowns out all the other noise. And one day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Jake came home from New York for a weekend visit. Sarah had invited me over for dinner, one of those things we did often, cooking and laughing until the early hours of the morning, gossiping about our lives, about our futures. There was always an ease in those moments, a warmth that made everything else seem insignificant. But Jake ruined it all. Not intentionally. But in that way he had, the way he could walk into a room and make everything feel different. We were sitting at the kitchen table, wine glasses in hand, when it happened. Sarah stepped away to grab something from the fridge, leaving Jake and me alone for the first time in hours. He had that half smile on his face, the one that was always so infuriating. "You've changed," he said, his voice low. Not in a bad way. But you're different. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, trying to keep my gaze steady. "I don't know what you mean." Jake shrugged, leaning back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "I don't know. You just seem more interesting now. More grown up, I guess." I forced a laugh, trying to deflect the tension that suddenly filled the room. "Thanks, I think." But there was something else in the air now. Something thick and palpable. It was the kind of silence that wraps around you, holding you captive until it's too late to back away. Sarah's voice broke through the tension, and for a moment I was saved. She had returned, holding a bowl of salad, oblivious to the undercurrent that had shifted between Jake and me. But it was too late. I had already felt it, and once you feel something like that, it never quite goes away. The next day, Sarah went out with some friends, leaving me alone in the house with Jake. I had already told myself I wouldn't be alone with him again. It was a terrible idea, the kind of thing that's easier to say than to actually do. But here I was, in the same kitchen again, the same soft lighting filtering through the windows, and Jake was leaning against the counter, his gaze on me, steady and unwavering. You never really say what you mean," he said, his voice like gravel. "You're always hiding behind your words." "Why is that?" I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the intensity of it. I knew this was dangerous, knew this was the moment where I had to walk away, to shut it all down. But instead, I took a step closer to him. "Maybe," I said softly, "because I don't want to hurt anyone." Jake's smile faltered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something shift in his eyes, a flicker of understanding, or maybe it was something darker. Before I could stop myself, I reached out, my fingers brushing against his. It was like a spark, a sudden rush of electricity that shot through my body, igniting something I couldn't put out. I could feel him tense, then relax, as if he had been waiting for this moment too. "Sarah," I began, but my voice faltered. The words felt wrong in my mouth. "Sarah's not here," Jake said, stepping closer, his breath warm against my cheek. "And neither are the rules." In that moment, the world narrowed to just the two of us. The walls, the kitchen, the house, they all faded into the background. It was just him and me, and the undeniable pull between us. I shouldn't have done it. I knew that in my bones, in the pit of my stomach, even as I pressed myself closer to him. But the line between right and wrong had already blurred in that moment, and I couldn't bring myself to back away. There was something magnetic about Jake, something that pulled me deeper into the gravity of him. His hands were on my skin now, his touch sending ripples of heat through my body that I had no defense against. He leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear, sending shivers down my spine. "We don't have to tell anyone," he whispered. "This could be just between us." The words should have made me pull away. I should have recoiled, told him it was a mistake, that this wasn't who I was. But all I could do was nod, my breath shallow, my heart thumping in my chest. I wasn't even thinking anymore, just reacting to the heat building between us. And then his lips were on mine, soft at first, but with a hunger that mirrored my own. I kissed him back, almost desperate in the way I returned it, as if we both knew this moment was fleeting but couldn't stop ourselves from tasting it anyway. His hands were everywhere, sliding over my back, pulling me closer, until the only thing that mattered was the electricity sparking between us. It didn't take long for us to end up in his room, the door closing behind us with a quiet thud that seemed to echo in the silence. And once the door was shut, there were no more boundaries. No more rules. Only the frantic urgency of bodies colliding, of lips meeting and hands fumbling as we shed the remnants of our restraint. It was reckless. It was impulsive. It was everything I had told myself I would never be. But it felt alive. It felt like a fire that couldn't be extinguished, no matter how hard I tried. Afterward, we lay there, tangled in the sheets, breathing heavily as if we had just run a marathon. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable, and for the first time, I realized how much I had let go. How much I had given up without even realizing it. Jake shifted beside me, his arm draped across my waist. He trailed off, his voice hushed. Intense. I nodded, unable to speak. What could I say? I had no words for what had just happened. And in that silence, I started to panic. What had I done? I had crossed a line that could never be undone. And it wasn't just about the physical act. It was about Sarah. About my friendship with her, the trust we had built over the years. This thing that had just happened had the power to destroy everything. I sat up, pulling the covers around me, feeling suddenly exposed. "I can't do this," I said, my voice shaky. I can't be here." Jake didn't move. He didn't say anything at first, and I wondered if he was thinking the same thing. But then, his voice broke the silence, low and steady. "What do you want, really? From this? From us?" I stared at him, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on me. The truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know what I wanted. All I knew was that everything had changed in that moment, and I had no idea how to fix it. "I don't know," I whispered, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "I don't know what to do now." Jake didn't say anything more. Instead, he reached for me, pulling me back toward him, his arms wrapping around me in a way that felt like both comfort and something else, something darker. "We'll figure it out," he said softly, his lips grazing the top of my head. "We always do." The days that followed were a blur. I tried to push it all out of my mind, telling myself it was just a mistake, a moment of weakness. But the guilt ate at me, gnawing at the edges of every thought. I couldn't look at Sarah the same way anymore. I couldn't pretend everything was normal when I knew what had happened. Jake and I didn't talk about it. Not directly. There were stolen glances, lingering touches when no one was looking, a quiet acknowledgement of what had transpired. But the silence between us became suffocating, thick with unspoken words. And then Sarah started to notice. She started to sense the change between us, the subtle tension that had crept into every interaction. She was sharp, perceptive, Sarah always had been. She began to ask questions I wasn't prepared to answer. One night, after dinner, she cornered me in the kitchen. "What's going on between you and Jake?" she asked, her voice steady but her eyes searching. "You've been acting weird. Both of you." I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I thought about lying, about brushing it off, about telling her it was nothing. But the truth was hanging in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. "Sarah," I started, my voice trembling. She cut me off before I could say anything more. "Don't. I don't want to hear excuses. I just want the truth." The truth. How could I give her the truth when it would shatter everything? How could I tell her that the person I had trusted most in the world was now the one I had betrayed? It wasn't long before everything fell apart. The lies, the guilt, the secrecy, it all began to unravel in the worst possible way. Sarah found out. She confronted me. And then, in a fit of betrayal and rage, she confronted Jake. It was chaos. There were shouting matches, accusations, tears. The friendship we had built for years crumbled before my eyes, as fragile as glass shattering on the floor. And in the center of it all, there was me, standing in the ruins of everything I had destroyed. Jake tried to defend himself, but nothing he said could make up for what had happened. And Sarah was devastated. She couldn't look at either of us the same way again. The day she walked out of my life, I knew there was no coming back. I had ruined everything. I left. I had no choice. The house felt suffocating, the memories of what had happened choking me at every turn. And so I left, with nothing but my thoughts and the weight of the betrayal I had caused. Jake tried to reach out. He sent messages, called me, even showed up at my door once. But I couldn't face him. I couldn't face the man who had made me forget everything, who had pulled me into a world of desire and lies that I couldn't escape. And Sarah. I never saw her again. I didn't expect forgiveness. I didn't even expect understanding. But I couldn't live with the weight of the guilt anymore. In the end, I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my life. And it was my own doing. Time, I discovered, is both a healer and a poison. It numbs you to the sharpest pain, yet allows the bitterest feelings to fester in the dark corners of your soul. The days following the fallout with Sarah and Jake were long and empty, filled with nothing but the sound of my own thoughts that grew darker, colder, and, eventually, more vengeful. I had lost everything. My best friend. The trust one had built over years. The respect I had once carried so easily was now nothing but a distant memory, buried under the weight of betrayal and regret. But amidst the pain, something else was stirring, something that wasn't just sorrow. It was anger. It was rage. It was the gnawing, relentless need for payback. What Sarah had done to me, what Jake had done to me, it wasn't just betrayal. It was personal. They had taken something from me that I couldn't get back, my dignity, my sense of control. And that was something I wasn't going to let slide. They thought they had destroyed me, but I was far from broken. I started planning. Slowly, methodically, carefully. Revenge, I realized, had a kind of clarity to it, a singular purpose that gave me focus. The sting of what they had done to me no longer hurt in the same way. Now, it was fuel for what was to come. It started with Jake. The man who had crossed a line with me, who had taken something that wasn't his to take. He wasn't going to get away with it. I would make him regret it. The first step in my plan was simple: get close to Jake again. He had been trying to reach out, but I had ignored his calls, his messages, and his attempts at reconciliation. He thought I had just walked away because I was weak. But I wasn't weak. I was playing the long game. It wasn't hard to find him. Jake was a creature of habit, always the same places, always the same routines. He thought I had forgotten about him, but I had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment. When I showed up at his apartment unannounced one rainy evening, he didn't know what hit him. I stood there in the doorway, drenched from the rain, my eyes deliberately cold. "Jake," I said, letting the name linger in the air. He stood frozen for a moment, then finally stepped aside to let me in. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice betraying the slightest hint of uncertainty. "I thought we needed to talk," I said, smiling just enough to make him feel uneasy. We sat down, the silence between us thick. I could feel the weight of everything that had happened between us, but this time, I wasn't the one who was broken. I wasn't the one who needed answers. He was. "You think everything is just going to go back to normal, don't you?" I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. He shifted in his seat, trying to hide his discomfort. "I didn't think." "You didn't think," I interrupted. "That's the problem, Jake. You never thought." I watched as he struggled to form a response. The man who had once been so confident, so sure of himself, now looked uncertain, vulnerable. It was a weakness I had never seen in him before, and it made the satisfaction of revenge taste even sweeter. "I'm not here for your apology," I said, my eyes locking with his. "I'm here because I want something from you." Jake looked at me warily, unsure of what I was about to ask. I could see the fear in his eyes, a crack in his usually impenetrable facade. He had no idea what he had unleashed. "I want you to end things with Sarah," I said, my voice low and deliberate. "I want you to tell her the truth about what happened. About us." Jake's face went white. "You're out of your mind," he muttered, standing up. "That's never going to happen." "I think you'll find that it will," I replied, standing too, my movements deliberate. "You see, Jake, I've learned a lot since all of this. I've learned that people like you, people who think they can just do whatever they want, don't get away with it. Not with me." Jake was shaking his head, backing away. "You're crazy." "I'm not crazy," I said, stepping closer. "But I think you will be. You've hurt me, Jake. You've hurt Sarah. And I'm going to make sure you feel it." His eyes darted around the room as though looking for an escape, but there was nowhere for him to run. "I don't think you understand what you're asking," he said, voice trembling. "You can't. You're going to tell Sarah the truth." I cut him off, my voice suddenly sharp and final. "And if you don't, I'll make sure she knows everything. Every single detail. Every lie. Every moment of weakness you've ever shown. And then you'll really lose everything." He stood there for a long moment, his expression flickering between defiance and fear. Finally, he nodded, albeit reluctantly. "I'll do it," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was the smile of someone who had just taken back control. The next morning, I received a message from Jake. A short, terse note. "It's done." I didn't need to hear any more. I knew what that meant. He had told Sarah the truth, and now everything was in motion. I let a few days pass, giving Sarah time to process. I watched from the sidelines as she slowly began to unravel, the pain of the truth settling into her bones. She reached out to me a few times, but I ignored her calls. The time for forgiveness had passed. Finally, she showed up at my door, looking like a shadow of the woman I had once called my best friend. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you do this to me?" I looked at her, feeling nothing but a strange calm. "Because you took everything from me, Sarah. You and Jake. You thought I would just forget, but I didn't. I couldn't." Tears welled in her eyes, but there was no pity left in me. No sympathy. Just the cold satisfaction that comes from knowing you've gotten your revenge. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean to." "Save it," I said, my tone final. "It's too late for apologies." With that, I closed the door, leaving her standing there on the other side. The woman who had once been my closest friend was now just another casualty in the war I had waged. Revenge had given me something I didn't realize I needed, control. But it had also taken something from me that I could never get back. My relationship with Sarah was irreparably broken. Jake, I never saw again. In the end, I was left with a hollow victory. The satisfaction I had once thought would fill me up only made me feel emptier than before. But at least I had one thing. The one thing I had never had before, power. And that power, no matter how much it cost, was mine.